Well, hello, guys. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76 Sports. First of all, please like this stream, please share it, and please subscribe to the channel, especially if you're new. I think I set all the tags up on Thursday when I set up this broadcast. So if you're new, absolutely please subscribe to the channel. I am close to 1,000 subs, and hey, I'd like to get to that number sometime soon. Okay, so I apologize for going on late like this. I originally set this to 11 o'clock, and I'm setting up another website, another WordPress site. As some of you guys know, I'm a writer, and I'm working on a book project. And so I'm setting up, I set up my first WordPress site myself, and now I'm setting up my second site. And I'm trying to integrate the PayPal buttons onto the site, and I can see them, but they're not working. So I'm a bit anal. And so I spent time yesterday and time this morning, probably too much time, trying to figure that out and trying to get that to work. And then I had to get all the pictures together for this broadcast because I have a lot of pictures to show whoever comes through to watch this. And I just got started late. That happens sometimes, unfortunately. So I see extended clips. I think he left that comment a couple of days ago, or maybe he left it today. It says, "Good morning. The Fab 591 was legendary championship and increased my appreciation and love for college sports. UNLV, Duke, Georgetown, Kentucky, Indiana were great programs as well." And then Yakov 22 wrote, "Happy Sunday, Anwar. Thank you for being here, Yakov." I froze for a minute there. He also says, "The first tournament I followed was in 1985. I even feigned illness the first Friday, something I rarely did at the tournament in order to watch the day games." Okay, well, I'm going to talk about when I first started watching the tournament. So we'll get there. Let's see. That was the year Villanova had the amazing run to the national championship. Yep, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I didn't watch it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So, hey guys, so just before we jump in, today is Selection Sunday. So, and it's a big deal because a year ago, once the COVID-19 pandemic came to our shores, everything got canceled. And the big dance got canceled last year, and that was a big deal. And it was very sobering because this is like the Super Bowl, the NCAA tournament. The Super Bowl takes place on one Sunday, but the men's NCAA tournament, it's an annual ritual for us here. So not just for the kids, and it was heartbreaking to see John Calipari talk about, or hearing John Calipari talk about having to tell his kids, "Hey guys, we're not going to get to play." It was heartbreaking to see all those tournaments get canceled, and it was heartbreaking. Yeah, it was just, especially for the kids who never got to play in the NCAA tournament and they were about to get to experience it. So today it's a big deal. And it's really cool that the fact that we're going to have the tournament this year. It's not gonna. I know that they'll based upon the conference tournaments, there will be some fans in attendance. You won't have all the screaming and rabid fans in every venue, but the tournament is back. All right. Speaking of which, let's take a quick look at what happened yesterday with the Michigan Wolverines. Abdul Gaines is here. Let's see what he has to say. Watching UNLV destroy Duke to win the 1990 national title is one of my favorite memories in the NCAA tournament. Yep, we're going to talk about UNLV. But let's take a quick look at what happened yesterday with our Maize and Blue. And formerly Well, I don't know if Abdul Gaines, do you still root for Michigan basketball, or have you completely gone over to the scarlet and gray? Well, let's take a look at what happened with my maize and blue. So I'm going to enable my screen share here. So Michigan lost a nail biter to the Ohio State University in the semifinal round of the Big Ten tournament. And they lost that game 68-67. A couple of things to keep in mind. The Wolverines' number one player, their number one option, Isaiah Livers, he got hurt. I heard from Abdul Gaines that he might have broken his ankle or broken his leg. So he might be, it looks like he's probably done for the season. And also, the Wolverines, they beat Ohio State the last time. And so, Ohio State has had something to prove. I'm just talking off the top of my head here, looking at the game. Ohio State had something to prove. Michigan was Michigan was without their senior leader. And I think a challenge for number one seeds now is getting through your conference tournament without injuries. Because if you've won your the regular season championship, and if you're ranked in the top, even in the top 10 of the polls, you kind of don't have anything else to play for in that conference tournament. The other teams are fighting to get in, and then you have the lower teams in your conference who really want to impress the selection committee to get themselves in. But as the number one seed in your conference, it's very, very tricky because you don't want to lose one of your top guys for meaningless games. So in any case, Ohio State, and it was a close game. Well, the final score was close. It's 1 point. And Ohio State, I think, if they had played a smarter game within that last 2 minutes, it wouldn't have been a 1 point victory with our team having the chance to win in the closing seconds. But Ohio State made a couple of boners late in that game, and the game came down to what you would want. We had the ball in the closing seconds, and I remember the commentator said Juwan Howard is playing for the win. He's going for the win. And what happened was Mike Smith, our point guard, he dribbled the clock down, and then he drove from the three-point line. I think Liddell was guarding him, so I was thinking as I was watching that, how's he going to get this shot off with this 6'8", 6'10" guy on him? But he did the James Harden dribble in and step back behind the three-point line, and he hoisted one up, and it was a line drive. It was on, but it hit the back iron of the rim. And so it was a good shot. We had the last shot of the game, and it just didn't go in. So that, as a coach and as a fan, that's what you want to some degree. But I'm going to get to something that folks pointed out after the game. Why didn't the ball go down to Hunter Dickinson on that last play? At least, Mike Smith dribbled the clock out for at least 15 to 20 seconds. Why didn't the ball go down low to Hunter Dickinson so he could make something happen, or at least to kick the ball back out for a better shot? And when I played, whether it was in high school, organized, or on the playground, one of my pet peeves was always when the guards, when one of the guards would never look at the big guys, when they would just dribble the ball and do what they wanted to do. I think Juwan Howard and Phil Martelli have control over that team, but I'm just saying, as a big man, that always irritated me when the guards wouldn't look down low, and when we had some sort of advantage in the front court and they just take the ball and keep the ball and do whatever it is they wanted to do. So that was the game. just going to take a quick look at this, and then we're going to move on. Ohio State won that first half. No, we won that first half, 27-26. And then Ohio State won that second half, 42-20. And I'm going to take a quick look at the stats. Yeah, I mean, Hunter Dickinson, we've got a 7-footer. That was our advantage. And I just think you go to that as often as you can. So E.J. Liddell scored 18 for them. Dwayne Washington scored 24 for them. Those were their only 2 double-digit scores. Justice Sewing scored 9. And then for our Maize and Blue, Hunter Dickinson led us with 21 points. Mike Smith was next with 10. And our next highest score was Franz Wagner with 8. And I think Franz Wagner fouled out. But, yeah, Dickinson was our leading scorer. How does he not get his hands on the ball in that last play? I'm going to take a look at the chat right here. Let's see. I know a guy who roots for Ohio State football, but U of M basketball. He is likely bipolar concerning sports. Now, I don't know if you're talking about Abdul Gaines Yakov, but I'm hearing it's some sort of stress injury for livers, and he is out indefinitely. U of M isn't saying he's done for the season, but I'd be surprised to see him in action at any point during the NCAA tournament. Yep, if it's a stress fracture, then he's probably done. Yakov says, for a guy with a possible pro future, it would be in his best interest to not even try to play. Yep. Abdul Gain says, a friend of my brother's is a fan of both the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. Sports can bring about interesting alliances and allegiances. Yeah. Yakov says, yes, when I said bipolar, I meant in a fun way. Okay. So on Selection Sunday, and I'm going to try to wrap up in an hour or so, because I don't know what time the Big Ten championship game comes on. It's probably 1:00. So it's going to be between Ohio State and Illinois. And I watched. I really didn't have a chance to watch Illinois play this season, but I was watching them against Iowa yesterday. And Illinois, I could see how they. Now the speculation was that in that last game we played against Illinois, we were either our team was either mentally fatigued or we just overlooked them. But Illinois has an athletic team. They have that big guy in the middle who's a little more bulky than Hunter Dickinson. And they've got an athletic team. So I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Ohio State today. And I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois makes a deep run into the NCAA tournament. So, okay. With that out of the way, let's jump in. So, as I was thinking about this live stream, and as I was thinking about the NCAA tournament, I thought it would be fun for us to, whoever tunes in, whether you're here live or whether you're watching on the playback, I thought that it would be fun to take a little walk down memory lane at some of our most memorable men's NCAA tournaments, and also some of the most memorable moments. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about when I first started watching basketball and versus when I stopped paying attention to all the nuts and bolts of college basketball, and when I started watching more from a distance. I think when I got to graduate school at the University of Michigan, I didn't have the time or the energy to watch everything, down to every player stat and where they came from, and those kinds of things, and what their heights and their weights were. There was a point where I would follow at least the NBA like that, and there was a stretch where for the Power 5 basketball conferences, I knew almost everything about every player, and I even knew quite a bit about the mid-majors and the smaller conferences as well. But so we're gonna take a walk from the 1990 tournament to the 1996 tournament, because those were the years when I really watched. And if you guys have memories of your own there in the chat, I'll keep an eye on the chat, and you guys can contribute to the show as well. I know everyone doesn't like to come into the broadcast. I might drop the link in there at some point if someone is feeling brave and bold today. I don't see Alex in there, but that's what we're going to do. I'm going to basically ground this in the tournaments from 1990 to 1996. And one of the underlying themes, and I've said this before on my channel, is that it's a much different, the basketball landscape is completely different today than it was 30 years ago. And I think that's in large part due to all of the top high school players either going straight to the NBA or doing the whole one and done thing. So it's in my mind, when you look at today's NBA and yesterday's NBA, and when you look at today's college basketball landscape versus yesterday's college basketball landscape, yesterday meaning 20 to 30 years ago, it's like night and day. So I've told many of you all that I'm working on a book project about my high school basketball experience. And I'm going to start talking about that some more on this channel. But in that story, one of the things that I when I look back and I realized, and the reason the story is important is because sports teach us a lot. Sports teach us a lot about life. And when whichever level you play at, and when you dedicate yourself to it, it teaches you a lot. So my little journey began in Buffalo, New York. Abdul Gaines grew up here as well. And in my Your Attitude Determines Your Altitude video, I talked about my head coach at Hutch Tech High School, Ken Jones, who was a true student of the game. That was my 1990. That was our 1991-92 team. I'm a sophomore. I'm standing there in the back. And when I look back at that experience, one of the things that I remember, one of the things that stands out to me the most is, while I wanted to play basketball, I didn't know a lot about basketball. And what I mean by that is, learning the game is a huge part of learning the game is going out and playing and, getting your jump shot so that it's accurate, and mastering your handle and doing all these things and learning the fundamentals, because basketball is a game of fundamentals. But you also have to watch it. You also have to watch the game, and you have to study, and you have to figure out different plays you can make. You have to figure out what a pick and roll looks like. You have to figure out what a zone defense is and how to counter a zone defense. And a lot of your learning comes from actually watching the game. And because there weren't a lot of men in my family, well, no, there were men in my family, I'm sorry. Because there weren't a lot of men around, my parents were divorced and my uncles mostly moved away, I didn't get a lot of exposure to sports from K through probably till about K through 7th grade. And that's when I first saw, okay, Abdul, I'm going to show the picture of your favorite basketball player of all time. Around 7th grade is when I saw Michael Jordan hit the shot. And that was the seminal moment for me. That's when I said, wow, I want to play basketball. And I'm sure it was like that for a lot of kids. But that was the seminal moment for me. If you're watching this right now and you played at some point in your life, and you had a seminal moment where you were inspired to go out on the court and play, you can leave that in the chat right now. But for me, it was this shot over Craig Elo and the Bulls vanquishing the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that year, the Bulls, obviously, for those who don't know, they beat the New York Knicks, and then they lost to Detroit for the second straight year in the conference final. But I started watching at that time as well. I think the previous season is when I started. It was the Lakers versus the Pistons NBA Finals, and this is when I first started learning about the NBA. I saw the kiss between Magic and Isaiah. Isaiah hurt his ankle. The Lakers went on to win in 7 games off of arguably that controversial foul Bill Laimbeer committed against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So my whole point is I started learning about the game late, in the late 80s. So what does that mean? That means that I missed a lot of the great Big East basketball. And the argument could be made that the golden age for the Big East, the old Big East, was the 1980s. Patrick Ewing and the Georgetown teams, the Cinderella Villanova team, St. John's. Chris, what's his name? It's escaping me right now. He went to play for the Warriors. Luke Carnesecca, number 20. Chris, he's right there in front of me. Number 20. What's the kid's name? Chris. Damn it, I can't think of his name. Abdul Gaines. What's his name? Right there. He was on the Dream Team with Jordan and those guys. Chris. Anyway, the 80s was the golden age for the Big East. And so I missed Chris Mullin. Thank you very much. It's sometimes these things are on the tip of your tongue and you can't think of them. So that was the golden age for the Big East. And because in my opinion, my uncles weren't around and my parents were divorced, there were no men there watching basketball. And growing up under my mother's tutelage, we weren't watching a lot of sports. So I missed the Georgetown teams, the Villanova team, the St. John's, the battles between Georgetown and Syracuse. And Syracuse was only 2 hours away from Buffalo. But I missed seeing the brilliance of Dwayne Pearl Washington, for example. And again, the reason this is important is because part of your learning to play a sport is actually watching the sport. So if any of you have young people in your family who are fatherless or don't have any men around, keep that in mind. You know, if they want to play football, if they want to play basketball, a major part of learning is actually sitting and watching. One of my mother's, hey, what's going on, Nate, the Wolverine fan? Thanks for coming through. Now, guys, I understand this is an abnormal broadcast. We're giving Jim Harbaugh another break, and we're going to get back to Jimmy. I have a lot of Michigan articles piling up in my inbox. This is an abnormal broadcast, and that it's going to be more storytelling and more looking back on history. So watching basketball. So one of my mother's boyfriends actually told me at the time, he said, you should pay more attention to the college game. And he said, the reason is that's the next level up from where you are in terms of how old these kids are. But when I really sat down and started watching, I also realized that they were playing the game the same way we were. So going back to my high school coach, Ken Jones, he was a fundamentals guy. And so we were learning all the fundamentals of the game. We were learning how to run presses and zone offenses and out of bounds plays from the side of the court, under the basket, and from the opposite basket. We were learning all these fundamentals. And when I finally sat down and started watching men's college basketball, I started to see all those strategies being implemented in real time. So I just wanted to say that. That's why I started watching all this, and it was a relatively late start. So so when did I start watching college basketball? Well, let's go back to 1991. 1991 was the Bulls won their first title that year in the NBA. The Buffalo Bills lost to the New York Giants in Super Bowl 25 off the Scott Norwood missed field goal. But also the UNLV running Rebels were running through their competition, any of their competition in the Ncaa tournament. I mean, in the Ncaa. They played in the they were undefeated going into that tournament. And the Rebels were coached by Tark the Shark, Jerry Tarkanian. And one of the things that people noted during that time was that they played in a small conference. And UNLV has its own history, and there's a nice documentary that HBO did, I think, on UNLV and Jerry Tarkanian. So they had a long history even before that season. But UNLV was the defending champ. And I remember my best friend was rooting hard for UNLV. And so I didn't know that much about them other than the fact that they blew out Duke the previous year. So I started rooting hard for UNLV, and I thought that they were going to go ahead and win. So with that, let's take a look at that 1991 NCAA tournament, and let's talk about what happened in that 1991 NCAA tournament. Now, I'm hoping you guys can see most of this. So in that 1991 NCAA tournament, UNLV was the number 1 seed in the West region. Let's see, Ohio State was the number 1 seed in the Midwest region. And North Carolina was the number 1 seed in the East region. And then Arkansas was the number 1 seed in the South region. And so Duke, the Duke Blue Devils, that year, they were actually the number 2 seed in the Midwest region. And so what that did was that put them on a collision course with UNLV in the national semifinal. And what we saw, again, keep in mind that the previous year, the UNLV running Rebels steamrolled Duke. And so what you were kind of expecting, if you weren't watching Duke all year, was you were expecting these guys to steamroll Duke again. But what happened, and later on, Jerry Tarkanian said my guys weren't ready to play that game. You know, they seemed like they were in a daze. They seemed like they were in a bit of a trance. And when that game unfolded, Duke came ready to fight. And it was a close game. It was a nip and tuck game. And Duke had a freshman that they didn't have the previous year named, where is he? I know he's in here. Give me a second. Well, he should have been in there. Come on, StreamYard. The circle is spinning. I make this computer do a lot. There he is. Arguably, one of the advantages Duke had in that game, or a key piece they picked up from the previous year when they got steamrolled by UNLV, was Grant Hill. And Coach K even said that Grant Hill was the best player in that game. Grant Hill was 6'8". In that game, he was a freshman. He was 6'8", but he had the size and the versatility, and he added an extra dimension to that game that allowed Duke to stay toe-to-toe with UNLV. So it was a hard-fought game. I think it was more of a contest than UNLV expected, and Duke wound up winning that game 77-79 off of the I think Larry Johnson shot up a three-pointer at the end of the game, which clanked off the rim. But the other key piece to them losing that game was Greg Anthony fouling out. And once you could visibly see it, once Greg Anthony fouled out of that game, UNLV was like a snake without its head. And they were pretty aimless, and they were pretty directionless without Greg Anthony out there. So those were my very, very first memories of men's college basketball. I didn't watch the entire season. I just remember watching that semifinal game, and then I watched the national title game where Duke beat Roy Williams' Kansas Jayhawks, and obviously the signature moment of that game was the Grant Hill alley-oop from Bobby Hurley. So that's the 1991 NCAA tournament. And until I researched this, I didn't realize that Duke was a number 2 seed. But that was a big deal at the time, UNLV losing. So let's go on to, let me stop this. So let's go on to 1992. So 1992, now I'm watching a little bit more after watching the upset, the Duke UNLV upset. And by the way, my best friend said that the game was fixed, the game was rigged, UNLV got robbed, and it was definitely a somber moment. Even if you weren't as invested in the game, it was definitely a somber moment when UNLV lost to Duke, and you could just look at Anderson Hunt right there, just kind of shell shocked as they're filing off the field and actually off the court. And actually, interestingly, that was pretty much the last we ever heard of those UNLV teams, because I think Tark went to the NBA and UNLV we never really heard from them again. So let's talk about the 1992 NCAA tournament. So for myself, now I'm watching a little bit more. And I actually, was kind of watching prior to the tournament. And for those of you who don't know, there's the bracket. For those of you who don't know, Christian Leitner is one of ours. And when I say one of ours, he's from Western New York. Christian Leitner grew up in Angola, which is a town south of Buffalo. And Christian Leitner attended the Nichols School, which is right in the heart of Buffalo. And early that season, what Coach K would do is Coach K would schedule games in the hometowns of his seniors as a way of showing love for his seniors. He would schedule games in their hometowns. And so one Saturday, I wasn't paying attention because I didn't know. My best friend called me up and said, "Hey, Duke is playing Canisius down at the Odd." So I went and I turned the TV on. And sure enough, Duke is playing Canisius, which is one of our small Division I schools in Western New York. They were playing Canisius at the Odd. And had I known about it ahead of time, I probably would have asked to get tickets to go. But no one talked about it. My coach didn't talk about it, and I didn't hear about it. By the way, for those of you watching, I see there are only 4 here. By the way, if you're watching, please like the stream. Does anyone know? I'm going to do some trivia throughout this. Can anyone tell me who was coaching Canisius in the early 1990s when Duke came to Buffalo to play Canisius? I'll wait for a second. Let's see if I know Abdul Gaines knows if he's still watching. I know he knows, but does anyone know who was coaching Canisius in the early 1990s? Take a sip of my coffee here. All right. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Abdul Gaines must not be watching because he would have mentioned this immediately. It was John Beilein. John Beilein, one of his stops was Canisius College in Buffalo. And then he went from there to, I believe, West Virginia for a number of years. And after that, he came to Ann Arbor. But John Beilein was coaching Canisius College during that range. So Duke came to Buffalo, blew the doors off Canisius, which you would expect. And so does anyone know who Duke played the week after that? I know that I only have a few viewers, and you guys probably wouldn't know this. Yeah, Wolf 58. We're doing a little. I'm doing a little walk through some of my greatest memories of the NCAA tournaments and moments. And right now, I'm talking about the Duke teams, and I'm going to talk about the '92 tournament in a second. But I'm asking. I just asked everyone if they knew who was coaching Canisius. Because Duke played Canisius, which is in my hometown, in 1992, in 1991, in December, and then they traveled to play another team in the Midwest the week after. Does anyone know which team that is that Duke played the next week after playing Canisius in the December of 1991? I'll give it about 10 seconds. 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. And all right. So the answer is that next week, Duke played where is it? I thought I had that picture queued up. But I did not. That next week, Duke played Michigan. And that was probably considered the official coming out party of the Fab Five. And I was, middling around at home when that game came on, and I got to see Chris Webber shoving Christian Leitner around and posting Christian Leitner up and catching alley-oops over Christian Leitner. And I don't remember all the trash talking in that game that they highlighted in the Fab Five and the 30 for 30 Fab Five documentary. But I remember Michigan taking Duke down to the wire and wondering who these guys are. Who is Chris Webber? Who is Juwan Howard? Who is Jalen Rose? So if you were following high school basketball and college basketball at that time pretty closely, you knew who Chris Webber was. You knew who all these guys were. But if you weren't following closely, then you didn't know who those guys were. So that was my first time seeing Chris Webber play. Speaking of the Fab Five, Juwan Howard, does anyone know, and this is a piece of trivia, does anyone know why Juwan Howard wears number, or why he wore number 25? I'm going to leave that out there, and I'm going to come back to that later on. So this is the 1992 bracket. The number one seeds were Kansas. Kansas was the number one seed in the Midwest region. Ohio State was the number one seed in the South region. Let's see. Duke was the number one seed in the East region. And UCLA was the number one seed in the West region. That was probably the first tournament that I really, really watched. And there were a lot of that was a great tournament because you had players in there and you had teams in there like Memphis State. Who remembers that Penny Hardaway was a star at Memphis State? That was my first time hearing about Memphis State. That was my first time seeing Penny play. They made a deep run into the regional. They made a deep run into the where is it? Yeah, they made a deep run into the Midwest region where they got smacked by the Cincinnati Bearcats. And that was my first time ever hearing about that there was a Cincinnati Bearcat team. Whereas, the Memphis State Tigers ran into these guys. Bob Huggins started to build a program, a competitive program at Cincinnati And the controversy with Bob Huggins' program was that he used a lot of JUCO players. So Cincinnati beat Memphis in the Midwestern Regional Final. Both two teams from the Great Midwest. And so that was an exciting tournament. Also, the Fab Five, they made their run, their unforeseen and unlikely run. I think they beat the first team might have been Middle Tennessee State, or was it Middle Tennessee State, East Tennessee State? One of those teams beat. Oh, the bracket's right here. Why am I saying that? So Michigan knocked off Temple first, and then I think in my opinion, what cleared the way for Michigan to go to the Final Four was East Tennessee State beat Arizona. So if East Tennessee State didn't beat Arizona, then Michigan would have played Arizona in the field of 32, and Arizona was the number 3 seed. So who knows if Michigan would have been able to beat Arizona. But the NCAA tournament, what makes it exciting is about who gets upset. And sometimes upsets pave the way for other teams. So Michigan marched all the way to the Final Four. But arguably the biggest play leading up to the Final Four was in the East Regional Final, which featured a matchup between Duke and Kentucky. And I remember watching that game because I was in the back of my mother's house. I was in the back of the house watching the game in my mother's bedroom. I think she watched on the main TV. She was watching something like Beauty and the Beast in the front room. So here's the shot. Here's the shot against Kentucky. You're looking at, let's see, that's Antonio Lang. That's Richie Farmer right there, number 32, looking on from the side of the key. Number 12, that's Raymond Feldhaus. He's right in front of Christian Leitner. I don't know who 31 for Kentucky is, but that redheaded guy over there for Kentucky, that's John Pelfrey. Number 11, that's Bobby Hurley. I don't know who number 31 might be Aminu Timberlake. That's the kid that Christian Leitner stomped on the chest. But I was rooting against Duke in this game, and I was thinking, okay, I don't know a lot about this Kentucky team, but they're not Duke. And they were hanging with Duke up until Jamal Mashburn fouled out of that game. And the game went into overtime. It's arguably the best college basketball game ever. And it came down to this last shot. And I remember jumping up in disbelief when Christian Leitner hit that shot. And if you watch the documentaries on that, Rick Pitino and his coaching staff made the strategic blunder of not guarding the inbounds passer. And that allowed Grant Hill to throw that baseball pass all the way down the court. And Christian Leitner just hit a great shot. He just hit a good shot. I have a comment here. I'm going to read it. Let's see. Will 58 says, I didn't see Penny until he hit the NBA. Yep. Well, you have to remember that Penny also, the Great Midwest, was not one of your Power 5 conferences. It wasn't one of your bigger conferences at that time. So unless you lived in the South, then you probably wouldn't have known who Memphis State was. But he turned out to be very much a diamond in the rough in the NBA until Shaq left for the Lakers and he started facing all those injury problems. But Penny Hardaway, when he got to the NBA and when his game was on, he was arguably the future of the NBA, in my opinion, until his knees started messing up. So let's go back. So, and guys, I didn't like, even though he was from our area, I didn't like Duke. I didn't like Christian Leitner. I didn't like Coach K. In my mind at that time, they were like the Boston Celtics. They were like Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. It was considered a white boy team, even though they had, black players on there like Grant Hill and Thomas Hill and Brian Hill and Antonio Lang. But ESPN made a documentary on this as well. I hate Christian Leitner. But at that time, I was rooting against them and I didn't like them. But as time went on and as I look back, I have a lot of respect for Christian Leitner. And Christian Leitner was a bad dude. Christian Leitner was, at least at the college level, Christian Leitner was he was the guy. And he arguably helped pave the way for what we see in basketball now with all the stretch fours and the stretch fives. Your 6'10", 7-foot guy stepping up behind the arc and shooting it. Christian Leitner was the first one to do that. Christian Leitner was the first one to stand at that height and have versatile guard skills. All the other big men like Shaq and Alonzo Mourning were posting up close to the basket and overpowering guys. But Christian Leitner was, he was the first stretch four and stretch five, if I recall correctly. So in any case, so that was that. So your Final Four consisted of Cincinnati, Michigan. Michigan won that game 76-72. Duke knocked off Bobby Knight's Hoosier team 81-78, which led to the rematch in the final game. And of course, that game, we all know that game was close in the first half, and it looked like Michigan might pull the upset. And I think that Sports Illustrated picked Michigan to win that game against Duke. Christian Leitner was in a funk. In the first half. Bobby Hurley and Grant Hill kept Duke in the game in that first half. And then I guess word is that Mike Krzyzewski went in the locker room and cussed out Christian Leitner, and Bobby Hurley cussed out Christian Leitner, and Christian Leitner remembered who he was in the second half, and then he came out and blew the doors off Michigan in the second half. And they went on to win that game 71-51. Wolf 58 says, those OSU teams of the early 1990s were great. Mark Baker, Jim Jackson, Chris Kent, Lawrence Funderburk never lived up to their potential. Yep, they were coached by Randy Ayers. And actually, the NCAA tournament committee set it up so that Michigan and Ohio State could meet in the South Regional Final. And that's what happened. That was a classic game. I remember watching that game. I remember rooting for Michigan. I didn't really have an attachment to the Fab Five at that time. I think I started watching this tournament and watching the Fab Five's March when they played Oklahoma State. Yeah, because Eddie Sutton's kid, Sean Sutton, was playing at that time. And I remember I watched that game, and then I watched the Ohio State game, and then I watched them beat Cincinnati. So, yeah, that was that Ohio State team was loaded. Of course, Jim Jackson went to the pros, had an average career. I think Lawrence Funderburk might have gone as well. Didn't really hear too much from him at the pro level, but that was a good team as well. In the Fab Five upset them. Okay, so that was the 1992 tournament. So going into 1992-93, the whole question was, could Duke do it a third time? And by the way, I as I was putting the pictures together, I realized that there were quite a few Duke pictures here. And at that time, when I started watching, that was the golden age of Duke basketball, arguably. And even all throughout the 80s, that's when Duke was on its ascent. And there were a lot of years when Coach K got to the Final Four and they were unable to seal the deal. But when I was putting these pictures together, I realized, okay, those first couple of years of me watching college basketball, that was the golden age of Duke basketball. And actually, there was another shot if you watch the Christian Leitner documentary, there was actually another shot before the Kentucky shot. And so it turns out that one of the teams that Duke regularly met up with in regular season play or non-conference play, and also in the NCAA tournament, one of the teams that they met up with quite a bit was Connecticut. Jim Calhoun's Connecticut teams. Here it is. Christian Leitner's UConn shot. I appreciate all you guys for being here. I know this isn't football, and this is a different kind of broadcast, but yeah, this was the shot before the shot. So apparently, I think they met up in the regional, maybe that year that Duke got destroyed by UNLV, and Christian Leitner hit a game winner against them. So Christian Leitner had a history of hitting big time shots against opponents. He was a bit of an assassin. So the 1992-93 season, the question was, could Duke three-peat? Duke, I believe Michigan went down to Durham to play the Blue Devils. I remember being in high school and talking to a classmate and saying, yeah, Michigan's going to go down there and win. Michigan's going to beat Duke in Durham. And he said, Michigan is not going to beat Duke in Durham. And I think in that game, Michigan wound up getting blown out by the Blue Devils at home. No, down in Durham in Coach K in Cameron Indoor Stadium. That's what it was called. Abdul Gaines says Beeline did a great job everywhere he's been. Yeah, Beeline can coach. And again, before he went to West Virginia and to Michigan, he was coaching our Canisius Golden Griffs. So the 1992-93 season, that was the sophomore season for the Fab Five. That year, they switched the nickname to the Sensational Sophomores. And if you go back and watch the Fab Five documentary, it was during that season where Jalen said that they started seeing that college basketball was a business where everyone else was profiting except for them. That was the year that they unveiled the Black Sox in the tournament. Everyone started doing that afterwards. But also, I remember the number one high school player going into that season was a kid named Jason Kidd, coincidentally, from Alameda, California. And Jason Kidd went on to play at the University of California at Berkeley, the Golden Bears, and with Lamont Murray. And again, I hadn't watched much college basketball up to that point. So when I started seeing the Cal Golden Bears, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe those are the UCLA Bruins. But they weren't. UCLA was in Los Angeles. Cal is in Berkeley. And which leads me to the 93 NCAA tournament. And so one of the questions was, would Duke three-peat? And it turns out that they could not, because Duke got upset in the, let's take a look at the tournament here at the bracket. Duke, where's Duke? Duke got upset in the second round by Jason Kidd and the Cal Berkeley Bears, 82-77. And that was a big deal. That was a really, really big deal because, again, Duke had been to the Final Four probably each of the previous, 4 to 5 years. And so now this young Jason Kidd is coming out of nowhere and upsetting the defending champion. I remember this picture was the cover of Sports Illustrated, and it said, "The Kid slays Duke." And so that was it for Bobby Hurley and Thomas Hill and that class. So that was a shocker. I have a comment here. Wolf 58 says, I always get Canisius and Niagara confused. Yep, they're different schools. The Canisius Golden Griffins and the Niagara Purple Eagles. They play in the same conference, but different schools. So going back to that tournament, once again, another question was, could the Michigan Wolverines get back to the Final Four and win the thing? And if you watched the Fab Five documentary, Chris Webber, he told the reporter that, yeah, if we don't get back the seat and win it, the season's going to be a failure. So they did get back, but it was a bit of a rocky road getting back. Let's see, Kentucky was the number one seed in the East region. Michigan was the number one seed in the West region. North Carolina was the number one seed in the Kentucky was the number one seed in the South region. Michigan was the number one seed in the West region. North Carolina was the number one seed in the East region. And Indiana was the number one seed in the Midwestern region. And for Michigan, if you remember, it was a bit of a rocky road getting back. They beat Coastal Carolina, but they just barely escaped from the UCLA Bruins. They won that game 86-84. I think that was off of the it was either a Jimmy King or a Ray Jackson putback. But they almost got upset. They went on to beat George Washington, and they beat Temple in the regional final 77-72 to get back to the Final Four. There they met up with Kentucky. They beat Kentucky. North Carolina defeated Cincinnati in their regional final to get back to the Final Four. Funny thing about Cincinnati, I have a picture of Nick Van Exel here somewhere. Where is it? There it is. Excuse me. Nick Van Exel got drafted and played for Abdul Gaines' Los Angeles Lakers for a few years. But I remember in that East Regional Final, Nick Van Exel came out and he was on fire. He torched North Carolina in that first half from the three-point arc. And I was thinking, okay, Cincinnati's going to upset North Carolina and go back to the Final Four. Dean Smith made some adjustments at halftime, slowed Nick Van Exel down. North Carolina advanced to the Final Four. But the funny thing was, afterwards, or somewhere along the line, Nick Van Exel said, Dean Smith is not that great a coach. For all the talent he had at North Carolina, he should have won more Final Fours. And George Karl, who played at North Carolina and coached the Sonics for a number of years, took exception to that and said, who the hell do you think you are to say that about Dean Smith, Nick Van Exel? So we know that Michigan went ahead and defeated Kentucky to get back to the national title game. And then North Carolina beat Kansas 78-61. That was a matchup of master and apprentice, Dean Smith versus Roy Williams. And then we get to, I have a comment here. Memorable moment from the East Regional, the 1996 East. Memorable moment for me, 1996 Eastern Michigan beat Duke first round. Chris Collins, who was Doug Collins' son, crying at the bench. Yep, absolutely. So Michigan meets up with North Carolina in the final game. It was I think on paper, Michigan was probably the better team in terms of the Fab Five and also their backups. They had some talented backups behind them. Eric Riley, James Voskuhl, Rob Pelinka. You could throw Michael Talley in there. So they had some experienced vets backing them up. I think North Carolina was probably more disciplined. They were probably more disciplined. They probably made some smarter plays down the stretch. And they were probably a little more fired up and ready to play that game. That's a picture of that North Carolina team. I think they held a reunion. I found this online. You see the two seats are empty up there at the top. One of those was Dean Smith. Michelangelo, as Dick Vitale calls him, passed away probably about 7-8 years ago. And I don't know who, that might be Coach Guthridge on the end, who also passed away. But they took a reunion picture years later. But that's the team that beat Michigan. And we know that the game came down to this piece of history here. The Chris Webber timeout. This needs very little explanation. Again, this was still early in me watching college basketball. So when Chris called the timeout, I didn't know that they were out of timeouts, and I didn't know what the penalty was for calling a timeout when you have no timeouts left. And as we know, it went on to be, okay, 2 free throws for the other team, because it's a technical foul. The Tar Heels made both those shots to ice the game, and that sealed the victory for the North Carolina Tar Heels. So that was Dean Smith's second national title. It came, in my opinion, and as Jalen Rose said in the 30 for 30, we lost. We were the better team, but we lost. I think North Carolina was probably just a more disciplined team, and they played better at key stretches, and Michigan had to battle back. But ultimately, it came down to this timeout play. And also, if you recall, Chris Webber traveled on that play leading up. He dragged his foot. The refs didn't call it, and he dribbled up the floor and he called the timeout. I'm going to read this comment here. Wolf. The Chris Webber brain fart. Yeah. Chris Webber. I hear when I got to Michigan, I met someone who was at the university at that time as a student, and she told me that Chris Webber kind of, I guess, locked himself in his room at that time, and he didn't want to talk to anyone, and he took it really hard. I mean, but who wouldn't? If you were the player who, I mean, even if he didn't call the timeout, they had to hit a shot to either tie the game or to pull ahead. But that was the play that sealed the deal for his team. And arguably, Michael Talley could be blamed for that as well, because the legend is that Michael Talley was calling out from the bench, "Call a timeout, Chris. Call a timeout." Yakov 22 says, regarding 1993, Michigan did have more talent, but UNC probably played better team basketball. Yep, that's right. That's right. I agree with that. It seemed like at times Steve Fisher just let them play. And it was a thing of beauty watching the Fab Five play. And I always, when I think about watching Chris Webber play, I always felt like Chris Webber made the game look fun. He made the game look easy, and he made the game look fun. But at times it seemed like Steve Fisher let them play just a little bit too much. And so, that when you're going up against a disciplined team, that can come back to bite you, even if you're more talented. Let me see what Abdul Gaines has to say here. Abdul Gaines says that Carolina team wasn't chock full of elite level pros. It was a very good college basketball team. The 93 Carolina team was some of the best coaching Dean Smith ever did. Yep. I think the only players that went pro on that team and played for a while, I know George Lynch went pro, and he was on the Sixers with Iverson for a little while. But I can't really think of anyone else from that Carolina team who went pro and had a long NBA career besides George Lynch. Abdul Gaines, if you can think of someone please let me know. So, and also that one of the things I saw from that tournament, and we got 3 more to go, guys. Penny Hardaway and Memphis State. As we know, Penny Hardaway and Chris Webber went pro after that tournament, after that season. And I think they both said, screw this college thing. The previous year, Memphis State made it to the regional final. But that season, I remember expecting them to make another deep run, but they got upset. Well, they were the 10th seed and Western Kentucky was the 7th seed, but I was expecting Memphis State to make another deep run, but they got eliminated in the first round, 55-52. And I think one of the lessons that I saw there was that it's hard. It's not always easy to repeat the success every year that you had the previous year. And unless you're Duke, there's unless you're one of the blue bloods, there's a high potential for you to get upset in the tournament. So the Fab Five. Abdul Gaines says Eric Montross was in the league for a while. Okay. He must have been a role player on someone's team. So there was a bit of a domino effect to that Fab Five loss. If you go back and watch the 30 for 30 documentary, Ray Jackson says we were all going to go pro after that season. Well, you can imagine if they had won, they probably all would have left that year. They didn't win. They probably still could have all gone pro, but I don't think there was the same momentum for them that there would have been if they had won the whole thing. So Chris Webber, as we all know, Chris Webber went to the league, went pro. So now the Fab Five became the Fab Four. And as we all know, there was a lot going on in the background with Ed Martin and money being given to Webber, or a loan, or whatever you want to call it. And the college basketball landscape changed. I think that as we'll see in the next year, I think that changed the fortunes of the Fab Five. Obviously Penny Hardaway left, so that was another star leaving the NCAA level for the pro level. So this had that loss to North Carolina had a bit of a domino effect. Let's see. Yeah, Coach says Montross played 8 seasons as a mostly marginal player, but good enough to last 8 years. He says Anwar can offer an all-time 90, 96 all-tourney team, regardless of position. Bobby Hurley, Christian Leitner, Corliss Williamson, Tim Duncan, Grant Hill. Where's Chris Webber? How do you not put – Chris Webber wasn't a 4-year guy, but how do you not put Chris Webber in there? Okay, you did put Grant Hill in there. Okay, so let's move on. And I'm going to wrap this up soon, guys, because I know and I appreciate all you guys hanging in here. So let me stop this one. $1993-94. 1993-94. Chris Webber's gone. Penny Hardaway's gone. So I think the question going into this year was whether or not North Carolina could or would repeat, because they brought most of their players back on that North Carolina team. They brought back Montross. They got back Derek Phelps. They got back Donald Williams, who was the MVP of that game against Michigan. But they also North Carolina also reloaded with a player from Oak Hill Academy named Jerry Stackhouse, who I saw in one of my Sports Illustrated for Kids magazines. I didn't know who Jerry Stackhouse was at that time, but I recognized him. And they also brought in a kid from Simon Gratz in Philadelphia named Rasheed Wallace. So North Carolina brought back, they lost George Lynch, they lost Brian Reese, but they brought back the core of that team. And they reloaded with Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse. In terms of Michigan lost Chris Webber. Michigan lost Chris Webber, but I think it's also worth noting they lost their senior backups, their experienced backups. They lost Rob Pelinka. They didn't lose him. They graduated. Rob Pelinka graduated. Eric Riley graduated. James Voskuhl graduated. Michael Talley graduated. And then they brought in guys like who I'd never heard of, like Maktar Njai and Olivier St. Jean. They brought all those guys in. And I remember reading the Buffalo News, and the article read Fab Four and Fife. So you're taking Chris Webber out of that starting lineup, and now you're inserting Dugan Fife. So now Jalen Rose is playing more of a two-guard position. Dugan Fife is playing more of a actually, you're playing more of a three-guard or maybe even a four-guard type of offense because Jalen was so versatile. So now instead of Chris in there, you got Dugan Fife with Jalen Rose, Jimmy King, Jimmy Jackson, and Jawan is now your primary low-post player. And they had a pretty good year, but it just wasn't the same. And basketball teams are a lot about chemistry. So when you take your alpha dog out like that, just like when Michael Jordan went to go play basketball, it creates a very, very different team than when that person was there. Also, if we go down to Durham, Grant Hill was now a senior. So now instead of being Christian Leitner and Bobby Hurley's team, now it was Grant Hill's team. And they had a pretty good team. They had Grant, they had Antonio Lang, they had Jeff Capel. Who remembers Jeff Capel? Jeff Capel was a freshman. Eric Meek, Chris Collins. So they had a pretty good team down at Duke as well. So going and looking at the tournament, your number one seed in the West region was Missouri. Who remembers the twins? Slim and Slam, Simeon, and Sammy Haley. Those were the Slim and Slam from Missouri. In the South region, your number one seed was Arkansas. In the South region, the number one seed was North Carolina. And in the East region, I'm sorry, I keep getting this mixed up. In the East region, your number one seed was North Carolina. And in the South region, the number one seed was Purdue. Okay, the Boilermakers. So how did this all shake out? Well, Missouri got all the way to the Sweet Six, the regional final, where they lost to Lute Olson's Arizona Wildcats, 92-72. Damon Stoudemire, Khalid Reeves at the guard positions, Ray Owes, Reggie Gary. They had a pretty good squad. In the South region, Arkansas defeated Michigan 76-68. Let's talk about that for a second. Going back to the Fab Five, watching that game, if you watch the replay of that game between Arkansas and Michigan, Michigan was in that game. They were in that game. Even without Chris Webber, it was close. It seemed like every time Michigan got up close to Arkansas, Arkansas ran back out. So that entire game, Michigan would catch up, Arkansas would run out ahead. Michigan would catch up, Arkansas would run out ahead. Arkansas played that, what did Nolan Richardson call it? 40 minutes of hell. So they liked to press, and they didn't have a tall team, but they had an athletic team. They had a team that played defense. They had a team that could shoot it. And they also, their star player was big, nasty Corliss Williamson. So they weren't that much better than Michigan, and I've wondered since then, would Michigan have won that game if Chris Webber was playing? And I would argue that yes, they would have won that game if Chris Webber had played, because Chris Webber was 6'9". He had guard skills, and he was, in my mind, the X factor. And I don't think Arkansas had a player who could have matched up with Chris Webber. And Michigan again was right there with them. And they made their usual Michigan plays. Again, Steve Fisher let them play a little too much at times. But I think with Chris Webber, Michigan would have gotten over the hump and beat Arkansas. That's just my opinion. North Carolina. So would North Carolina repeat? North Carolina ran into Jim O'Brien's Boston College team in the second round. That team had, well, let me ask you guys, who is on the Michigan coaching staff right now that was on that Boston College team that upset Dean Smith's North Carolina team? I'll give it a few seconds and I'll give you guys the answer. Who was on that team? I'll give it 10 seconds. 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 11. Okay. Howard Isley. Howard Isley was on that Boston College team that upset the North Carolina team. Howard Isley, Malcolm Huckabee, Gerard Abram, Daniel Abrams was a freshman. Daniel Abrams actually gave the hit that knocked Derek Phelps out of that game. And North Carolina was salty about that afterwards. And Bill Curley. Bill Curley was their big man who could shoot it from long range. So they upset North Carolina. So no, North Carolina was unable to repeat. Boston College went on a run of their own. They knocked off North Carolina. They knocked off Indiana. And they met up in the regional final with Lon Kruger's North Carolina Gators. And that was a close game up until the last couple of seconds when Lon Kruger drew up a play that sprung that kid right there in the middle. I believe that's Craig Brown for a three-pointer, which put Florida ahead and allowed them to beat Boston College. So that's Andrew DeClerc on the right. I can't think of the kid next to him. Yeah, I got Craig Brown, Dimitri Hill, the meat hook, and then the kid on the end, that's Dan Cross. So that was the core of that team. But that was all made possible by Boston College's upset of North Carolina. Duke, Grant Hill's team. That team was the number 2 seed in the South region. Duke marched all the way to the East Regional Final where they met up with Purdue. A memorable play from that Marquette game, they beat Marquette in the Sweet 16, was the Grant Hill dunk over Jim McIlvaine. We were talking about that years afterwards. Jim McIlvaine was a 7-footer at Marquette. Jim McIlvaine got drafted by the Sonics, the Seattle Supersonics, got paid a lot of money, and I think that's what made Sean Kemp salty that Jim McIlvaine got paid a lot of money. But anyway, Grant Hill dunked over Jim McIlvaine. And then Grant Hill's Duke team met up with Glenn Robinson's Purdue team in the regional final. And they beat the Purdue Boilermakers to advance to the Final Four. One of the plays of that game, there's Grant Hill and Glenn Big Dog Robinson. The memorable play from that game was the Jeff Capel behind the back pass to Antonio Lang for the dunk. And that might have been the furthest that one of Gene Cady's teams ever got in the NCAA tournament. And that was a memorable matchup. Purdue also had Quanzo Martin and Matt Waddell. So that was a good tournament. So Duke advanced to the Final Four to play Florida, and Arizona advanced to the Final Four to play Arkansas. This was all in Charlotte. And if you guys recall, Bill Clinton attended that game. Bill and Hillary attended. Might have been the national final against between Arkansas and Duke. But Arkansas eventually wore down Arizona, beat them 91-82. And then I remember Khalid Reeves getting worn out in that game. And then the second game was very, very exciting. I remember that the second game, because the way they marketed it was CBS was very clever. And what they did was they put together this thing where Lon Kruger said, "Hello, America. I'm Lon Kruger, the other Coach K." And I thought it was hilarious. He said, "Hello, America. I'm Lon Kruger, the other Coach K." So you had Coach K against Coach K. So Florida came out and they fought Duke toe to toe for that entire 40 minutes. And in that first half, Andrew DeClercq came down and he dunked on Antonio Lang, and he went like that. And that was a big deal because he dunked on Antonio Lang, and you say, okay, this team is athletic enough and they're strong enough to beat Duke. And as the game went on in the second half, Duke showed their experience. Duke pulled away, much to my chagrin at the time, though I was starting to root for Duke at that time because I liked Grant Hill. And Grant Hill, during that tournament, he started showing his he was really, as the senior leader of that team, Grant Hill was really able to show his versatility. And he was arguably the best player on the 92 championship team. In the final game, and this game is on YouTube, if any of you guys want to go back and watch it. But the final game between Arkansas and Duke, it was a thing of beauty. It was back and forth. It was a fast-paced game. It was played the way Nolan Richardson probably wanted to play the game. And there was a lot of shots raining in from three-point range. Grant Hill was hitting threes. Chris Collins was hitting threes. Everybody was a thing of beauty. The game came down to, but as Arkansas did that throughout the tournament, eventually Duke started to wear down. And the game came down to this shot right here by Scotty Thurman over Antonio Lang, the outstretched arm of Antonio Lang. You see everybody. This is cool because you can see everybody watching. Chris Collins is watching. You got Clint McDaniel down there in the paint. You got Grant Hill, Corliss Williamson, Corey Beck, Jeff Capel, Cherokee Parks. They all know the game is hinging on this shot. And Scotty Thurman hit a good shot. It went over Antonio Lang, and it went into the cylinder for him, and Arkansas went on to win that game. And Bill Clinton and Hillary, they celebrated up there in the luxury box. And afterwards on Sports Illustrated, the Sports Illustrated cover, it read "Hog Heaven." Hog Heaven. So that was kind of cool. I have a comment here. It's always good to see Duke lose. Abdul, again, I started gaining respect for Duke at that time. And it could have been just because I didn't like Christian Leitner at that time, that I couldn't stand him. But during that run, when Grant Hill led the team, I started gaining respect for them. Hey, Abdul Gaines, remember Joe Baumgartner from our class? I used to tease him. I used to call him Coach K. And he knew that I was rooting for Kentucky and Rick Pitino, and he called me Coach P. So we had that little rivalry going on. But I started gaining respect for Duke at that time. So the other thing that stands out to me, we only have 2 more tournaments to go, guys. And I want to thank everyone who's hung in here for this one. that was the first time I really saw the bond between player and coach. After that loss, Coach K just wasn't, and Grant Hill, they weren't just dejected about the loss. But I remember Coach K saying, the hard part about all this is that I'm not going to get to coach Grant anymore. Grant's not going to be coming to practice. I'm losing Grant. And Grant arguably could have gone pro after his sophomore year. He probably could have gone pro after his junior year. But in that era, some of those guys liked the college experience, and some of those guys stayed. And that stood out to me after that tournament was that that sadness between coach and player about the fact that Grant would no longer be in the Duke program. Abdul Gain says, yeah, I think I remember him. I hope they don't make the tournament this year. Okay, so two more, and then I'll shut it down because we're at an hour and a half. Two more. So let's go to 1995. The 1995-96 season, no, actually the 1994-95 season. That was my first year of college. I was at the SUNY College of Rockport. Let me see. Give me a second here. The 1995 NCAA tournament. The 1995 NCAA tournament, that was the guys, that was the last ride. That was the last ride for the members of the Fab Five class. Chris went pro after his sophomore year. Jawan and Jalen went pro after their junior years. Glenn Robinson was the number one pick. Let me pull that picture back up. Glenn Robinson was the number one pick that year. I think Khalid Reeves was a senior, so he went out. All those guys were in the same class. But all that was left of the Fab Five class was Jimmy King and Ray Jackson. So they were the elder statesmen on the team now. In that season, you had freshmen like Maurice Taylor and Gerard Ward and Maceo Baston and I think Travis Conlon. So it was very much a changing of the guard. And you just watching that, you're kind of like, wow, no more Fab Five. They're all gone. What can they? And that's not saying that Jimmy King and Ray Jackson weren't good players, but you were thinking, now what can they get done without Jalen Rose, Juwan Howard, and Chris Webber? What can they? How far can they go without those two guys? So you're wondering, would Arkansas repeat? Where's the Hog Heaven picture? I had a picture of Nolan Richardson in here hoisting the trophy. I wanted to show that picture. And by the way, I think that was the only time Nolan Richardson, that was his only national championship. And I think that's the only time one of his Arkansas teams made it to the Final Four. So that was historic. That victory was historic for numerous reasons. I think Nolan Richardson was the second Black coach to win the NCAA tournament. Where are you, Nolan? There it is. There it is. Yeah, so the question is, could and would Arkansas repeat the way Duke did about 3 to 4 years earlier? So I think Arkansas went through that season pretty much as you thought they would, winning. I think they were in the Southwestern Conference at that time. I'm not sure they moved over to the SEC at that point. And so for that tournament, your number one seed in the Midwest region was Kansas. That Kansas team was loaded. Roy Williams was able to get his Kansas teams to the tournament and to the Final Four, but he was just like Dean Smith. He wasn't able to close the deal every year. But that season, he had players like Jacques Vaughn. Who was that white kid he played with? Jacques Vaughn, Jared Haas, Greg Ostertag, Scott Pollard, and he had a freshman on that team named Paul Pierce, the Truth, who years later would be one of three players one of many players on a Boston Celtics team to break LeBron James. I'm sorry, Abdul Gaines. I had to do that. I had to say that. But Paul Pierce was on that Kansas Jayhawks team. Kentucky, that Kentucky team, they were the number one seed in the South region. I'm thinking about players like Roderick Rhodes, Tony Delk, Walter McCarty must have been on that team. All the players the bulk of the players who won the tournament the next year were on that team. I think Jamal Mashburn might have gone pro. No, Jamal Mashburn went pro with Chris Webber and Penny Hardaway. So he was long gone. The number one seed in the East region was Wake Forest. Who was on that team? Randolph Childress and Tim Duncan. A young Tim Duncan was on that team. A freshman Tim Duncan. In the West region, the number one seed was the UCLA Bruins. So what happened in that tournament? Well, just briefly, Kansas advanced to the regional final where they were upset by the Virginia Cavaliers in overtime. Harold Dean, Junior Burrow, Curtis Staples. That was an athletic team. That team in the regional final lost to Arkansas. So Arkansas returned to the Final Four. Kentucky advanced to the regional final where they lost to North Carolina. So that North Carolina team now featured Jerry Stackhouse and Rasheed Wallace. They were the two. They were the 1 and 2 players on that team now. And if I recall correctly, one of the things that cost Kentucky that game was Roderick Rhodes wanted to make it a one-on-one matchup between him and Jerry Stackhouse. And he kept taking ill-advised shots, and North Carolina played their game and they advanced. And in the East regional final, Oklahoma State knocked off UMass. UMass in high school, as UMass was gaining steam, I started rooting for them. And I remember in high school, Abdul Gaines teasing me about that. I was riding hard for Marcus Camby and Lou Rowe and what's the kid's name? Derek Kellogg and Coach Calipari. I was riding hard for UMass, and UMass got upset by Oklahoma State. One of the things that caught up with UMass that year was one of their players, Michael Williams. And I learned this about sports. And if you watch sports, especially college sports, you see this. Sometimes players violate rules and they get suspended from their teams permanently. And I remember Michael Williams was UMass's long-range shooter. So he closed out a lot of games for them. Partway through that season, he did something. I don't remember what it was, but I remember being in my dorm room and seeing it on ESPN that Michael Williams has been suspended indefinitely from the UMass team. So that caught up with them later that season in that NCAA tournament game against Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State had big country Brian Reeves and Randy Rutherford and Scott Pierce and Adrian Owens and those guys. And then out in the West Final, UCLA knocked off Connecticut. That Connecticut team who had Ray Allen and Donyell Marshall and Kevin Ollie and Daron Sheffer. I remember my uncle after that game saying UConn just couldn't handle the ball, so they must have been turning the ball over. I didn't watch it. But Donyell Marshall, there was footage that season that ESPN kept playing of Donyell Marshall dunking the ball and going, like that. So I bet this is Abdul Gaines responding to the breaking breaking LeBron James. Like Nick Wright said, Paul Pierce is like the 75th best player in NBA history. He's a pinky ring champion. Okay. So in the Final Four, much to my surprise, I thought that I was rooting for the North Carolina team, but Arkansas had too much for them, and they knocked off North Carolina 75-68. In the other semifinal, UCLA had too much for Oklahoma State and knocked them off 74-61. And then in the national title game, UCLA had too much for Arkansas and beat Arkansas 89-78, which surprised me because I didn't think that UCLA team was, when I watched them, I didn't think that they were particularly strong. It wasn't a, where's the picture of that team? That team featured the O'Bannon brothers, Ed O'Bannon, Charles O'Bannon, George Zedek, and Toby Bailey. And Toby Bailey, I think Toby Bailey was athletic, liked to dunk the ball a lot in transition, and a running joke around that time for if you were out on the playground and there were light-skinned biracial kids playing, you might get called Toby Bailey. I remember being in a playground in Buffalo around that time, and there was a biracial kid. He might have been Puerto Rican, but he had curly hair on the top of his head. And one of my buddies named Chuck, who liked to rib and make fun of people, kept calling him Toby Bailey. So, all right, guys, I got one more. And so that was, that UCLA team, they won. And then I think they well, let's see what happened in the 96 tournament. So, guys, I'm going to end this with the 96 tournament. And I want to thank everyone who has stayed on and watched this. You must be a basketball junkie if you stayed on and watched this. And I know that the majority, a good number of my subs here are football fans. So I want to thank all you guys who hung out and watched this. And if you watched this on the playback. The 96 tournament and the 96 men's college basketball season, in my opinion, I'm glad I saw this. That tournament, and we're going to get to this, UCLA was upset by that Princeton team in the first round, which nobody saw coming. So that was a big deal. But in my opinion, this was arguably the last great season and the last great NCAA tournament, in my opinion. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. In the college basketball world at that time, you still had players like Allen Iverson was a sophomore. Okay. Everybody knows his history. I'm not going to get into it, but John Thompson helped him salvage his life at Georgetown. And that was surprising to see because Georgetown was a big man dominated program. And John Thompson allowed it to become a guard-oriented program under Allen Iverson and Victor Page. So Allen Iverson was in the Big East. He was in the NCAA. Where's some of the other guys? Marcus Camby was a junior. He was still in the NCAA playing college basketball in the Atlantic 10. Ray Allen, Jesus Shuttlesworth, before he was Jesus Shuttlesworth, he was in the Big East in the NCAA, still playing. Where is the other one? Kerry Kittles was still in the NCAA. I think he was a senior that year. But my point is that you still had all, and that's Felipe Lopez back there. For those of you who don't know, who was at St. John's, he was pretty big. I don't think he had a great college career. He went on to play pro, but he was a big deal as well. He's Dominican. My point is that season you still had a lot of great players in men's college basketball at that time. Players today that either wouldn't go to college or who would do the whole one and done thing. And you got to remember that time the AAU thing was really starting to gain steam. So the landscape was changing a whole lot. But that was, in my opinion, that was the last great year. And the Big East, I remember Dick Vitale and ESPN kept talking about the Big East is loaded, the Big East is loaded, the Big East is loaded. Well, that's because you had teams like Georgetown with Allen Iverson. You had UConn with Ray Allen. You had Villanova with Kerry Kittles. And you also, a team which probably might not have gotten as much fanfare, is you had Syracuse with John Wallace. And I'm going to talk about him in a little while. But so the Big East was loaded that year. It was a quote unquote, I remember that season they kept saying it's a down year for the ACC, but the Big East was loaded, and I think it was one of the last great years. Let's jump ahead and look at the tournament. So that year, Connecticut was the number 1 seed in the, I believe that's the East region. They were the number 1 seed in the East region. Purdue was the number 1 seed in the Midwest region. UMass was the number 1 seed in the, actually, that's the East region. Okay, this must be, no, the Final Four was in East Rutherford. Okay, so UMass was the number 1 seed in the South region. And then Kentucky was the number 1 seed in the Midwestern region. And Kentucky was picked to win it. I think Dick Vitale picked Kentucky to win it earlier that season. So the Ray Allen team, the Connecticut team, they've been showing this footage, but they were one of the top teams the entire season. And Ray Allen was coming into his own, and they beat Georgetown in the Big East final off that buzzer beater. And that iconic footage is still on YouTube if you look it up, where Ray Allen is running off the court, celebrating. And what happened in that tournament was the UConn team advanced to the Sweet 16. And they were upset by Mississippi State, 60-55. And so what everyone was anticipating was a regional final matchup between Connecticut and Cincinnati, because Cincinnati had players like, they were having a good year. They had players like Damon Flint, and they had players like, who remembers Danny Fortson, big Danny Fortson, Arthur Long, Keith Legree. They had a loaded team that year. So UConn got beat by Mississippi State. Dante, who's that his name? Dante Smith, Dante Harris, something Dante, Eric. They had a big center. I can't think of his name. Daryl Wilson was their point guard. And it turns out in the that regional final, Mississippi State upset Cincinnati as well, 73-63. And I remember Cincinnati being particularly heartbroken over that loss. So it's all about matchups. Connecticut getting beat basically paved the way for Mississippi State to get there because they were a better team than Cincinnati. Those kinds of things happen. In the Midwest region, what happened over there? Purdue was upset by Georgia in the round of 32, 76-69. So now you knock off the number one seed there. They had Brad Miller, Jerron Cornell. That set up a Sweet 16 matchup between Georgia and Syracuse, and that was a great game. Syracuse was led by John Wallace. John Wallace has significance for me because he's from our sister city, Rochester. Buffalo and Rochester are close together. And there was no Facebook back then. There was no internet back then. So unless you were actively reading the newspapers or actively reading the recruiting publications, you could live in the next town over, next city over from you could live in the next city over from someone and not know who he was. And so John Wallace was a big deal. I had a live stream with some of the LaSalle basketball players and coaches from Western New York. They played this guy 1 year in the state regional. And this guy was a parade All-American. It was a big deal. He was a big deal. So he went on to Syracuse, which is just up the road, maybe 2 hours. No, Syracuse is an hour away from Buffalo. John Wallace stayed all 4 years. And so it was his team, his senior year. And it was a great game between his Syracuse Orangemen. Back then they were called the Orangemen. It was a great game between his Orangemen and Tubby Smith's Georgia Bulldogs. It came down to 2 shots, one by Jason Sapola to put the game into overtime. And then John Wallace hit this game clincher to win the game. And it literally ripped the hearts out of the chests of the Georgia Bulldogs. And I remember sitting there watching that game thinking, wow. And also that year, John Wallace was able to show his versatility. And I think that's what got him drafted into the NBA. Up to that point, he was the underclassman on a team with a bunch of senior players like Adrian Autry and Conrad McRae and Lawrence Moten. But his senior year, it was his team, and he got to show everything he could do. So he was making plays that I'd never seen him make before. So Syracuse defeated Georgia. And then in the regional final, they upset the Kansas Jayhawks. Okay. And that was a senior laden Kansas Jayhawk team with Jock Vaughn and Jared Haas and Scott Pollard. And I think Ostertag was gone at that point. But also, once again, Paul Pierce, who, years later would help break LeBron James. They were all on that team, and Syracuse upset them to go to the Final Four. UMass in the regional final in a monster matchup with Georgetown knocked off Georgetown. Allen Iverson made a really athletic play in the first half, catching an alley-oop over the UMass big men. But that was pretty much it. Georgetown was playing catch-up for the rest of that game, and I think that just like Michigan, I think that John Thompson let his Georgetown teams play a little too much at times, and he allowed Allen to do whatever Allen wanted a little too much at times. And when you go up against a well-coached, disciplined team, that will catch up with you, and that caught up with them. I think Georgetown, UMass won that game 86-62, so they really handed it to Georgetown. And then in that Midwest Regional Final, Kentucky knocked off Wake Forest 83-63. In that game, I remember they kept double teaming Tim Duncan, and so they took Tim Duncan out of the game, and they were able to overpower Wake Forest. That Kentucky team, that's that Kentucky team right there. So you had 00 Tony Delk, Anthony Epps, Derek Anderson, number 23 in that back line, that's Ron Mercer. Who remembers Ron Mercer? Number 24, there's Antoine Walker. Number 40, Walter McCarty. 13, Nazir Muhammad. So you had some tall, lengthy, versatile players on that Kentucky team. So they were able to take Tim Duncan out of the game and smother the other Wake Forest players in the Final Four. Almost done here, guys. In that Final Four, I didn't think Syracuse had enough to beat that Mississippi State team, but that Syracuse team did beat that Mississippi State team. It doesn't have the score here because it's covered up by that NCAA logo, but they beat them 71. It looks like 60 something. Remember, Syracuse played that zone. Jim Boeheim, that was his thing, playing the zone defense. They rode that zone defense all the way to the Final Four and into the national title game. And then over in the other national semifinal, UMass's run, their well ran dry against Kentucky. So I think the UMass team, they beat Kentucky earlier on in the season, and Kentucky won the rematch 81-74. In that final game, again, Syracuse, they fought to the end. I thought Syracuse was going to get obliterated by Kentucky, but it actually turned out to be a very, very close game that went down to a last set of shots. And one of the biggest shots in that game was from Antoine Walker. Syracuse was playing its 2-3 zone. Kentucky, they, reversed the ball a couple of times. Antoine Walker, who's 6'10", he caught the ball at the top of the key, actually at 45 degrees, and he nailed a 3-pointer, which I think was either the go-ahead 3-pointer or the 3-pointer that put that game out of reach. But up until that point, up until what might have turned that game was John Wallace fouling out. So John Wallace fouled out of that game, and he was hurting Kentucky from all over the floor, from 3-point range and from down low. He was hurting Kentucky. And just like when Greg Anthony fouled out of the UNLV game in 91, and just like when Derek Phelps got knocked out of the Boston College game, Syracuse was like a snake with his head cut off without John Wallace. So they were fighting for their lives and just to stay in the game after he fouled out. So that was that. So guys, wow, I talked for almost a whole 2 hours here. I want to thank everyone who hung out for this. Everyone who hung out and listened to me talk. Yes, Paul Pierce broke LeBron to the tune of 9 finals appearances in 10 years, including 8 straight for LeBron James. He just can't help himself. So going back, guys, why do I say that was the last great NCAA tournament? After that season, all of these guys went pro. This is the iconic slam cover. You got Marcus Camby, Starberry. Oh, that's right. Stephon Marbury was a freshman that year, and at Georgia Tech. And he led a 1-year resurgence at Georgia Tech, and then he was gone. So Stephon Marbury was a one and done. But all these guys went pro after that year. Marcus Camby, Stephon Marbury, Sharif Abdul-Rahim, Kerry Kittles, Steve Nash, who was a senior. John Wallace was a senior. Antoine Walker went pro early. Samaki Walker, I think he went pro early. But all these guys came out. You notice I didn't say Kobe Bryant or Jermaine O'Neal. Those guys skipped college altogether. And again, this was before the internet, and it was before where is it? Okay. I have to load it up from StreamYard. Give me a second. This was before the internet. This was before Facebook. This was before social media. So unless you were actively following the recruiting periodicals, you wouldn't have known who Kobe Bryant was at Lower Merion High School in Philadelphia. Though I will say this, USA Today, they did post the top high school players at the end of every season. So you had to watch USA Today, or you had to closely follow the recruiting periodicals, because there was no internet, there was no Facebook, no YouTube at that time. And it was through USA Today, actually, honestly, that I first found out who Jason Kidd was. I never knew who Jason Kidd was. And my high school coach actually posted, he kept scrapbooks and he kept newspaper clippings. And then I remember one season, Jason Kidd's senior season in high school, he posted the newspaper clipping from USA Today of the top high school players in the nation. And sure enough, there was Jason Kidd as the number one high school player. And his coach said Jason is unselfish, and Jason is the best. He's at his best when he's out in the open court, being unselfish and making his teammates better. So that's why I say that this was the last great NCAA tournament in an NCAA season. I mean, you didn't start seeing all the one and dones immediately after this season, but you started to see it more. LeBron James didn't go to college. You started seeing guys like Sebastian Telfair also from Coney Island, wanting to emulate what Stephon Marbury did. And you didn't see teams like this anymore, where seniors were staying in, where JUCO transfers were trying to get to big time programs to go to the pro level. You didn't see teams like this anymore, and we're not seeing teams like this anymore. And you're not seeing teams like this anymore, where the best kids feel a sense of loyalty to their schools and to their coaches, and where they want to stay for 4 years and go to practice and be in college. You're not seeing that anymore. Now, for some of the kids, could you blame them? I mean, we know that a lot of kids come from impoverished neighborhoods, and many of the kids aren't college material, and they don't necessarily want to be in college, going to classes, and they don't want to be there pursuing college degrees. So they should have, if they don't want to be there, and if it's going to result in some sort of recruiting scandal, then they probably shouldn't go. But I'm just saying that it's a much different game today than it was 20 to 30 years ago. And having come of age in that era and having grown up in that era, yeah, I miss that era, just like I miss this era. Well, if I can find the picture. I showed it earlier. I miss this era of the NBA. So it's a much different NBA now than it was back then, because you had so many players. Now, Isaiah came out after his sophomore year, and admittedly, Magic came out after his sophomore year after they won it. Michael came out after his junior year. So we've had players coming out, back to the early 80s. So this is arguably not a new thing, but back then more of them were staying in for 3 to 4 years. And so you had a much older, the NBA was a grown man's league. You had more older and seasoned, experienced players. And then arguably when the college players got drafted into the NBA, they were a little more seasoned when they got there. And there was a hierarchy to it. You had your older players, and then you had your rookies who were visibly younger, and the rookies had to earn their keep and earn their spot on the team, and they had to earn the respect of the veterans. And now you have so many young guys coming in, they're having to learn how to play on the job. So it's a much different paradigm, and it's a much, much different thing than it was years ago. I have some comments here. Peanut Butter Hero says college was fun, but I imagine making millions at 19 is funner. I agree. He says, today, if you stay the whole 4 years, are you really good? Yep, it's completely flipped. So the only way you're staying 4 years now is if you get hurt and you still need to play your stock up, or if you're not good enough to go early or bypass college altogether. That just is what it is. Let's see. Peanut Butter Hero says G League bound. He says, every time I see G League on ESPN, I change the channel. Why? Why do you change the channel? Can you blame a kid for wanting to monetize his abilities? No, you can't. Peanut Butter Hero says also WNBA and women's basketball. Yep, there's no WNBA back then. Young German Shepherds. You've been hanging out with that Bill Gaines too long. Oh, boy. Or you watch Minister Chap. Abdul Gaines says, our great Laker assistant coach, Jason Kidd. Yep. Peanut Butter Hero says, ball from the Hornets is straight. So must be talking about Lonzo Ball. He says Hornets may become a mainstay in the playoffs. Okay. So guys, I've managed to stretch this out to 2 hours. I didn't think I would go this long. But I'm going to go ahead and wind it down. But I want to thank everyone who came and watched this. I know some people came in and came out, but there was a core group who stayed in and watched this throughout. So I want to thank you guys. Oh, by the way, I asked a question at the beginning, and I'm going to bring it back, and no one gave the answer. Abdul Gaines, if you're still out there, does anyone know who can answer the question? Does anyone know? Does anyone know? Can anyone tell me why Juwan Howard wore the number 25? I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here, and I'm going to wait and see if anyone can give the answer. Does anyone know why Juwan Howard wore the number 25? And there are a lot of guys. It goes back to the city of Chicago. And there are a lot of guys who wear the number 25, and there's a reason for that. So I'll wait. Wow, I lost a couple people with just that trivia question. Does anyone know why Juwan Howard wore the number 25 in college? And I think he wore it in the pros as well. I've been talking so long, my coffee's cold. I'll give it 20 seconds this time, then I'll give you guys the answer. As a hint, there was a documentary on ESPN that talked about where Juwan Howard says why he wore the number 25. 2001, 2002, 2003. By the way, that's what referees do when they're doing the out of bounds plays, or when a point guard is advancing the ball up the court. They do a 2001, 2002, 2003. So I'm starting the count now. 20 seconds. If none of you guys can give me the answer, I'll just give it to you. Why did Juwan Howard wear the number 25? 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Wow, no one's answered it. Not even Abdul Gaines. All right, the answer is, it is in tribute to Benji Wilson. If none of you have watched it, I highly recommend watching this 30 for 30, the Benji Wilson documentary. In 1983, I believe, the 83-84 season, Benji Wilson was the number one high school player in the United States. They called him Magic, but with a jump shot. So he was about 6'8", 6'9". He had guard skills. He could shoot it. He could handle it. He could pass it. And he attended Chicago Simeon High School. Derrick Rose went to Simeon. Jabari Parker went to Simeon. A lot of the great players in Chicago went to Simeon. Again, he was the number one player in the United States, and he was getting recruited by Illinois. He was getting recruited by Notre Dame. He was getting recruited by Indiana. He was getting recruited by everybody. And his life he lost his life due to some foolish inner city violence. He had a random run-in one day with two guys from the neighborhood. They bumped, some words were exchanged, and one of the guys pulled out and shot him in his leg. And he bled to death because the ambulance took him to a non-trauma hospital, and he didn't get the immediate care that he needed. And he died. So, and he arguably, for his senior season, and also Nick Anderson went over to Simeon to play with Benji, and they arguably would have gone back and won the state tournament again. And Benji would have gone on to play in college, probably in the pros. So the whole basketball landscape would have been different had this kid kept his life and went on to the college and the pro levels. So it's a good documentary. It's a sad story. If you haven't watched it, I recommend it. And it reminds me, I'm going to close this out soon, guys. It reminds me, in terms of my own basketball journey, my father and my uncle once told me that many of the best basketball players are not in the NBA. And they told me the riddle that Michael Jordan isn't the best basketball player in the world. And what that riddle means is that there are so many good players out there who either couldn't do their schoolwork, number one, because again, back in the day, you had to go to high school, go to college to get to the NBA. So there are players who didn't do their schoolwork. There are players who didn't want to do the work, didn't want to work in their games. There are players who couldn't stay out of jail, players who got involved in crime or drugs or something. And then you have players like Benji who tragically lost their lives due to some sort of street violence. So there are a lot of players who we've never even seen play, who never got the chance to play on the big stage because of something like that. Exactly, Wolf. Just like in Cooley High, where the one kid, I can't think of his name. He played on Welcome Back, Kotter, and he played Joe Jackson in the Jackson 5 movie. He was the basketball star in Cooley High, and some thugs in the neighborhood took revenge on him because they had to go to jail. And Cochise, was it Cochise? Well, he was going to go play college somewhere. He was good enough, and some guys took revenge on him because they had to go to jail, and 2 of the other guys didn't. So that's how things go sometimes in the inner city. So, all right, guys, I have gone on for long enough. Thank you to everyone who watched this. I'm going to keep my eyes on Selection Sunday. I have some things to run out and do, like for example, I have to go to Home Depot for something. But let's see if Michigan still gets that #1 seed. Let's see if the committee penalizes them for losing in the tournament semifinal round. And then let's see how deep Michigan can go. With the way the tournament, with the makeup of the tournament now, and with players going pro and or doing the one and done thing, there's so much parity now, and so you never really know who the champion is going to be. You never know who's going to hoist the national championship trophy at the end of the Final Four these days. So let's see what happens. In this year, guys, I think I did a bracket once. Yeah, when I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan in the Department of Pharmacology, I did do one bracket. In one region of my bracket, that was the year Michigan State won in 2000. And so Wisconsin had a good year that year, and I picked LSU and Stromile Swift to come out of that region, and that whole region of my bracket got obliterated. I think Wisconsin made it that season. Wisconsin, they liked to pull the ball out and run offense and kill the clock, and they came out of that region. And so to make a long story short, I lost. I fell out of the pool early, so I've never done a bracket since then. I've never tried it, but I might do a bracket this year just for the hell of it. So thank you guys for watching. We have a lot of Michigan football to catch up on, so get ready, old khaki pants. The train's coming back around for thee. Or how did Kramer say in the episode of Seinfeld, the airport episode? Time's up, Crowsbar. The bells of justice toll for thee. Well, the bells of justice are coming back for you, Coach Harbaugh. So I've got a lot of articles to sift through and present. So there's going to be some more Michigan football content coming up soon. All right, guys. That's all I got. Thank you to everyone who watched. If you're watching on the playback, please like this video. Please share, and also please subscribe. Everyone, stay safe out there. Enjoy what's left of your weekend. Oh, Wolf says the Big Ten championship game is at 3:30, so that should be pretty exciting because those are two athletic teams with shooters, and I know Illinois at least has a big man, a real true big man. Lydell, he's more of a versatile big man, but Illinois has a big who'll get down there and bang, like my Uncle Jeff would say, he can bang with you. All right, guys, that's all I've got. Please like, share, subscribe. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.